We're talking about the flow, the divine flow of energy that enters into the universe. And we showed as an example of this, or a reflection of this, in and out movement. And we talked about the two levels of Yichud Ilah, Yichud Atah, upper unity and lower unity, which lower unity means that you exist, but you recognize that your existence is dependent on something that's bigger than you or larger than you. In other words, you're a creation, you recognize the creator. That's a sense of still a duality. There's two. There's you and there's the creator. And then there's a higher level, which is called Yichud Ilah, upper unity, which is that the small I actually does not exist, and there's only the big I, which was this passage that we quoted from the name of Hillel. Imanikan hakokan, if I am here, if the ultimate I is here, then everyone is here. Imenanikan, if the ultimate I is not here, then who's here? Then we're working on humbling the ego. So these are the two. Imanikan hakokan, the imenanikan mikan. So this was the two ideas of upper unity and lower unity. And we said the example for this is in terms of when we talk about creation, when it speaks about Hashem said, let there be light. So creation occurs through speech, and every speech, every word there are three levels of speech. There's the level of speech that exists as breath, then the level of speech that exists as wind, the level of speech that exists as speech, which corresponds to the world of souls, angels, neshamas, malachim, and olam, and worlds, right? These are the three universes. And because creation is continuous, and this we're going to continue with this idea. Since creation is continuous, so the flow of life actually enters and exits continuously in creation. And in this process, there's actually two sefirot, and then there's a middle column. And that's why when we think about creation occurring through the letter Bereshis, which is the first letter of the Torah, the Beis is structured with three columns, because there's the Chesed mode, the Gvura mode, and the Tiferes. So Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, which are the three primary emotions. The three primary emotions means these are the basic expressions. Every single expression that we have is either a Chesed reality, which is a right column sphere, which is expression of outgoing, and you're moving out of yourself towards something outside of you, or Gvura, which is restriction, you're moving inward. So every single emotion that we're doing, if it's fear, it's love, it's anxiety, it's happiness, it's joy, we're always either moving out or moving in. So Chesed is the expression of out, Gvura is the expression of in. And we were saying that essentially it's not about Chesed or Gvura, because we need both these movements. Chesed is the flow inwards into creation, which creates, sustains, and allows for existence to be. But if Chesed would not be disciplined, and it would just be the flow of Chesed, just giving, it would be an example of, let's say, a parent or someone that's close to someone and just wants to shower them with a lot of gifts. Let's say you have a child or someone that you love. Let's say and the person's immature, and you feel like, okay, I'm going to do everything for this person. I'm going to give them whatever they want, and even more. In effect, you're actually not doing them a favor, but you're actually spoiling them, and eventually they are going to resent the fact that you gave them everything. Because Chesed, without any boundaries, without any discipline, essentially will overwhelm the person that you're giving Chesed. So you need actually the element of Gvura, which is restriction and holding back. And that's the balance between the Chesed and Gvura, which when we spoke about in terms of the divine exhale and divine inhale, that every moment is a divine exhale, a cosmic exhale. The cosmic exhale is the flow of Chesed into this world. And we're, as a reflection, an inverted reflection of that, our inhale inhales the divine exhale, which means that's how we bring in Chesed into our life, kindness and compassion and life force. And every exhale, we're actually dying, so that's a moment of Gvura where the world is returning. And because the world functions on this place of Chesed and Gvura, which is these two columns, this gives us the ability for free choice. Because when we tap into the right column of Chesed, we can create, sustain, and give life. And if we tap into the element of Gvura, which is restriction, we can actually destroy and kill and hate. Because this is inherent within creation is a constant creation, and then undoing, destruction of creation. So there's creation is coming into being, is birthing into new every moment, but it's also being died. It's dying every moment. And these two elements is when it talks about, in the Torah we have a few times where it speaks about divine anger, divine wrath. And then it speaks about divine wrath. It speaks about kirega ba'apar chayim mertzayna, that kirega ba'apar, that the divine anger is for one moment. What does it mean that it's for one moment? What is divine anger for one moment? And it speaks about this idea of Bilam, that it says that he knew how to curse the people of Israel, and it says, the Talmud, the Gemara says in Brachos, that it's because he knew the moment of the divine anger, that one moment of the day, that there's one moment of the anger. So what does it mean that there's one moment of the day? So there's 24 hours and one moment at 6:38, 2 minutes, there's a divine wrath. So the deeper understanding of that is that every single moment actually has a moment of anger. What is anger? Anger is restriction. It's not really anger, but it's if a child is playing with a knife and is hurting themselves, or they're playing with matches or something, they're playing with something electronical that's dangerous, and it can cause a fire, and you pull away that thing from them, and that's gvur. So you're restricting them from holding that thing. The child who doesn't have an understanding of why that thing was taken away from him, the child may say, oh, that's anger. My parents are angry at me, or someone's angry at me, and therefore they're taking this away. But it's not really anger, it's just gvura. So gvura, when it's not understood, can be appeared as anger. And this is when we say that there's, at every moment in itself has a moment of chesed, and has within it a moment of gvura. And these are the two moments of and every moment has this exhale and inhale. And the exhale, the divine exhale, is the creation, is the chesed, and the divine inhale is the gevurah. Now, in these two movements of the exhale and the inhale, and the chesed and the gevurah, just like in breath, there is a retention period between the inhale and the exhale, which is the moment between the inhale and between the exhale. The retention is tiferet. That's the moment that contains the opposites of the chesed and the gevurah. So when you're when you're retaining your breath and you're not inhaling and exhaling, potentially you can inhale and then you can exhale, which means that place, that stillness, has the space that contains both the inhale and the exhale. Now this, what we were talking about last week, a lot of the discussion we're talking about comes from the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. And the student of the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mezrich, has a teaching as follows. I'm going to read you a little bit of the teaching because it's a variation of this idea, but it's connected to another concept which is called Ratzu v'Shuv u'mati v'loi mati, and I'll explain you what this means. I just want to read you 2 lines in the Hebrew, that it says like this: V'achayot yoreh ba'olamos mati v'loi mati, and the life force that comes into this world enters in a way that it reaches and it doesn't reach. Mati v'loi mati. It's a phrase from the Zohar that it touches and it doesn't touch. It reaches and it doesn't reach. That means it's almost like a flash of lightning. That let's say it's dark and all of a sudden a flash of lightning comes up, right? And you see the lightning. The moment you try to capture the lightning, it's already gone. But for that moment, it was lit, right? And you want to say, okay, I would like to see that lightning, but the moment you become conscious that you want to see it, it's already gone. So it's there and it disappears. This is called mati v'loi mati. It appears, and the moment you try to grasp it, it already disappears. Because it enters in a way that it's present for one moment and disappears right away, almost simultaneously. And it's called mati v'loi mati. This mati v'loi mati is also, another way of phrasing it is called Ratzu v'Shuv. Ratzu v'Shuv is running and returning. Running and returning is another Kabbalistic phrase, which is the source of that quote, of those words, is in the prophecy of Yechezkel. In the prophecy of Ezekiel, where he has a mystical vision, he has a vision of the inner chariots, of the inner worlds, and then he sees V'chayot Ratzu v'Shuv, and he sees that the angels, the life force, Chayot means also life, he sees that the Chayot are Ratzu v'Shuv. They're running and returning. Again, there's this. It's like a Barak HaMavrik. It's like a flash of light that comes and disappears. Ratzu v'Shuv. It feels like he's coming and then returning, coming and then returning. It appears to him and then disappears from him. This Ratzu v'Shuv movement. Now, the energy that comes down into this universe, and the reason why Yecheskel has this mystical vision of Ratzu v'Shuv, is because that's the way the divine presence actually exists within this world. Which means that for most people, we'll see soon that there's another way of seeing it, but for most people, the way they experience the divine life force, which comes from a perspective of Yichud Tata, which is lower unity. And it's lower because it's the perception that creation actually has independent existence. In the world that we perceive through our senses, the experience of the divine almost appears to us as mati v'loy mati. The moment we feel like we had an experience of something, that's the moment that the experience already left us. And this is also why it's considered like a dream, because the moment you become aware of your dream, you wake up and then the dream already disappeared. So this is the same thing also with the Chayis Eloki, the divine animating force, the way it's perceived from a level of Yichud Tata, of lower unity, is that it's perceived in a way that, let's say you're having difficulty and you feel alone, you feel separated, and all of a sudden it appears like there's a flash of light that clears everything up and dispels all the darkness and everything seems clear. But the moment you say, wow, I want to tap into it, it already disappears. You're back into your darkness. So what happens? Because this experience is the way the energy flow actually comes into the universe. From the perspective that there is duality, which is that there is a creation, the way the creation comes into being and the way it is sustained is this process of Ratzu v'Shuv, continuously moving. Let's just try to finish, then we'll take questions. It's a process of Ratzu v'Shuv. It's moving and returning. So the Ratzu is the movement out, and then the Shuv, it returns. Right? Ratzu is forward, and then Shuv, it's returning. So it's mati v'lo mati. It enters and disappears. You're on the receiving end of that light force. It appears to you that everything is coming and going simultaneously. Now, why is it that way? Why is the Chayis Ratzu v'Shuv? Why is the energy that comes down to the universe, sustains the universe, and really the perception, a higher level of perception? Why is it that way that we experience it, Ratzu v'Shuv, or mati v'loy mati? Is because of like this. Because haguf eni yachal lisbol sheyir b'achayis b'yoser. Let's read the Hebrew. Because the body cannot sustain itself if there was too much life force. V'gam achayis eni yachal lisbol sheyir b'guf. And also the life force cannot exist too long in a body. The fikach cholach achayis b'guf. Therefore, it enters into the physicality. Umiyad chayzel l'mayla, and immediately returns. V'zau havel, and this is breath. Okay, so this is the way it works. We said before that the flow is the flow outwards from the divine, from the Creator, from God, from Hashem, into creation. The movement outward is the right column, which is chesed, which is sustaining and giving, right? So this is the movement outward. Then there's the gevura, which is the restriction. So there's the movement giving and the restriction. But this movement of chesed and gevura is continuous. Chesed would be the Ratzu, that it's running. Shuv means that it's returning. So I mean it's running outward, meaning to sustain, to create, to give existence its existence. And then v'shuv, it's immediately returning. And that's the movement, Ratzu v'shuv. The reason why it works this way is because if there will only be chesed flow outward, so, in the words of the Maggid, two things are not going to be able to be sustained. The first thing is that the vessel won't be able to be sustained. The vessel, what is the vessel? The vessel, what is the kli? The kli is our perception, right? It's the way we function in a time-space continuum, which means that we perceive time as present, past, future, right? We perceive space, here, there, up, down, right, left, black, white, right? Everything works everything functions in a world duality. The chayos, the actual life force, is chesed. Chesed is a flow of life force, which is undifferentiated. It's just one sustainable creation. If there would be an overflow of chesed, the body, which means us, wouldn't able to be continue to be a physical existence as the way we perceive physical existence to be. Let's use a metaphor for this. Let's say, for example, take a child, and you want to teach the child information. Let's say you want to teach him something very deep, right? So what you do is you start off and you start telling them, let's say you want to teach him let's say you want to teach them, I don't know, let's say you want to teach them Zohar, the Talmud, and it's impossible, they don't even know how to read Hebrew. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to teach them the letter Aleph, then the letter Beis, right? And slowly they're going to gain confidence, they're going to start able to read, they're going to know how to translate the words, and slowly you're going to start providing them information. But what happens if you sit this kid into a classroom, and he's 5 years old and everyone else is 15 years old and everyone already reads Hebrew. So the first the teacher will say, okay, do you recognize the Hebrew letters? And the kid will say yes. Okay, so let's start reading. Within 5 minutes, the kid will be completely overwhelmed. And what happens then? The kid doesn't receive anything. This is a similar idea. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it's a similar idea with the movement of Chesed. If there's just a divine overflow of life force, then this vessel that receives this life force, which is meant to be a child, right? It's supposed to sustain a 5-year-old child, but the information is an overload. So what happens to the child? The child just says, forget about it, which means what it says that it forgets. It says, okay, I can't be this child. I'm not going to be able to assimilate this information. So there's a breaking of the vessel. The vessel is completely overwhelmed, and you didn't achieve anything. Because if the whole idea was that it should exist, and there's an overload of information, the thing that exists just disappears. You understand? So if the Chayes Eloki, if the divine life force would overflow into creation, it would create, sustain creation, and continuously clean creation without any restriction, then the table, the chair, and time and space will stop being table, chair, time and space. It would just be one. Right? But that's not the intention. The intention is it should be time and space and chair and table. So therefore, the life force has to create, has to enter into this thing that it is creating, but immediately return to its source so it doesn't overwhelm the vessel, that the vessel stops being a vessel, a separate vessel. So one is because of the vessel that's receiving. The other is because the light is really the opposite of the vessel. The light creates the vessel, but the light and the vessel actually have two opposite properties. The light, we can use very generic terms, but the light is spirituality, and the vessel is physicality. The light desire is to give, that's what it's doing, it's sustaining, it's giving, and the vessel's quality is to receive. So they have two separate realities, they have two separate qualities. So if the light is entering into the vessel to create it, that's why it's giving, right? So it's giving and it's creating the vessel. But if it's creating the vessel and the vessel wants to hold on to the light wants to disappear because the light has a separate nature than the vessel. You understand? Because the light's nature is to give and the vessel's nature is to receive. Now, of course, the intention of the vessel is to become like the light. But to become like the light through its own working, it should become similar to the light, which means that it's no longer physical, but it becomes a spiritual thing. It's no longer just a desire to receive, but also has a desire to give. So the vessel is transforming itself, but not because there's an overwhelming light that doesn't let the vessel to exist, but because the light enters it, it understands its source, and understands its root, and then it says, I want to be like my source. You're following? So there's two problems if the light enters the vessel too intensely. First of all, it overwhelms completely the vessel, and the vessel is no longer a vessel. So time, space, tables, and chairs don't exist. And the second issue is that the light doesn't want to be there. Using the word doesn't want to be there, it's not as if it has its own intention. We're talking about the Creator's light, and this is the divine ray of light. But the nature of this is to sustain and to give and to create, and the nature of the thing that it is creating is to be created and to be sustained. It has its opposite nature. So there's two movements here. Because the light, the Chayes Eloki, the divine life force that enters into creation, doesn't want to overwhelm the vessel. And it doesn't want to be too much in the vessel, but it wants the vessel to exist as a separate entity. And then the vessel should be transformed in a way that it becomes like the light. So the light enters into the Chayes Eloki, enters into the vessel, but immediately retracts. This movement is called Ratzu Shuv. Ratzu Shuv is going and returning. Now, what is the going and returning? Because we said that everything is actually reflected in us, so we're the inverse image of this idea. Our inhale is breathing in the divine Ratzu, right? The divine yearning to create, to sustain, right? That's the will of Chesed, to give. Our drawing inwards, which is Shuv, movement inwards, which is the inhale, is drawing in the divine Ratzu. So our Shuv is the divine Ratzu. Our exhale, and exhale is we're emptying ourselves, we're dying. That's what essentially we're doing every moment, right? We said we're being birthed and we're being reborn, and we're dying and being reborn at every moment. So our exhale, which is the death, is our Ratzu, because that's part of the divine Shuv, which is the return. You're following? So the divine Ratzu is our Shuv, and the divine Shuv is our Ratzu. What does that mean inwardly? Inwardly, we actually have these two movements. Our Ratzu. So here we have this structure, this meta structure, how the life force enters into the world. But how does it have to do with us? Why do we also function this way of Ratzu v'Shuv? So on a very deep level, it's because we actually feel these two things as well. On one hand, we have a yearning for transcendence. So whatever our lives are, whatever the bodies are, the situation that we have in our life, and whatever was alluded to us, whatever our physical body and the jobs we have in life, everything that we have in our life, there's something very deep within us that wants to transcend everything, and wants to become back into a spiritual being, back into Gan Eden, back to paradise, and not to deal with all the pettiness or all the details of life. There's a certain yearning. Some people, it's reflected in a very, very negative way, like people have a death wish or something. But the idea is that people have a yearning for transcendence. That's not a terrible thing. It's actually a good thing. People should have yearnings for transcendence. But the movement, remember, goes back and forth, which is Ratzu v'Shuv. So Ratzu is your yearning for transcendence, and that's essentially your dying, right? Because that's the divine Shuv, where the life force is returning, the Gvura. Every single individual person's Ratzu, the desire to transcend and to experience something that's beyond what you normally experience in life, that deep yearning is innate. We all have this yearning for something that's larger. I mean, it can come out with many different things. Some people need to buy new cars, and they think that they're going to have satisfaction by buying a new car, or a new pair of shoes, or to go to another place, or to meet new people. It's always a desire for something more, and this angst that the way it is, it's not yet satisfying, or for a better world. But there's something, a yearning for transcendence, a yearning for something more, for something larger. This deep innate yearning of Ratzu is connected with the divine movement of Shuv, where the energy is flowing back inward, and therefore it's uncreating, and that's the divine inhale, which is our exhale, and therefore we experience that Ratzu. Now what's the Shuv? The Shuv is the opposite movement. The Shuv is the awareness that we're taking an inhale. We're inhaling the divine exhale, which is divine Ratzu. That's a divine desire. The divine yearning is that we should exist. So therefore we feel a sense of mission and of purpose and of meaning in our life, and the way we live our lives, the way wherever we live our lives, in that life that we live, in the body that we have, in the time that we exist, in the place that we are, we have a sense that the Shuv, there's a purpose in what's happening right now. So we have this dual nature of the movement of Ratzu v'Shuv. Continuously, Ratzu is the desire for transcendence, or the better word would be, it's our yearnings, and Shuv is our awareness of purpose. Now, either one without the other is damaging, because if you just have a Ratzu, you just have the strong desire, it's like just the exhale to go back into the divine inhale, then you just want to let go of everything physical. If you have a very strong sense of Shuv with no sense of yearning for transcendence, then you just become very immediate and very just involved in whatever is present, and you don't have any sense of transcendence. And that's also not a negative. That's also not a positive thing. So the real goal is actually to reach a level where it's Ratzu v'Shuv. Now Ratzu v'Shuv is very different than Ratzu Shuv. Ratzu v'Shuv means going and returning. And the and is a very important word. Ratzu and Shuv are two separate movements. Ratzu is the yearning, Shuv is the sense of purpose, right? Just like in the divine. in the cosmic level, in the creator's level. The Ratzu is the desire to create. The Shuv is the desire to uncreate. In our life, the Ratzu is the yearning, and the Shuv is the sense of purpose. It's not about an either or. It should never be only a Ratzu or only a Shuv. There are certain times in the year that we celebrate and we commemorate and we're more focused on Ratzu, and certain times of the year that we're focused more on Shuv. Let's say Yom Kippur would be an opposite example of Purim, which one is a Ratzu element and one is a Shuv element. And they're both part of the same things because they're both about transcendence through the Ratzu and Shuv. But the ultimate is that there should be a balance between the Ratzu and Shuv. There should be a balance between these two. It should be Ratzu and Shuv. Ratzu and Shuv, the numeric value of the word Ratzu and Shuv is actually 611, which is the word for the Torah. So the Bris Kunosalim writes that the reason why Ratzu v'Shuv has to be v'Shuv, because that is what the Torah is. That's really what the purpose of the Torah is. The purpose of the Torah is that there should be the deep yearning and the deep sense of awareness of the return. It has to be the Ratzu and the Shuv. And this is basically what the teaching of the Maggid and some of the students of the Maggid that speak about these two movements of Ratzu v'Shuv, how it has to be, how it is actually an inward reflection of the divine Ratzu v'Shuv, v'chayis Ratzu v'Shuv, that the energy in the world comes in a way that's mati v'loy mati, it enters and leaves. That's why we experience this constant awakening or epiphany or some type of shift, and then it all of a sudden disappears and we go back into the darkness, because the life force itself moves in that same direction of Ratzu v'Shuv. We experience life the same way of Ratzu v'Shuv, this going and returning, this inhale and exhale, not just physically the inhale and exhale, but metaphysically and emotionally and mentally. We are going through the same processes of yearning and the sense of purpose. And ultimately the idea is to have Ratzu and Shuv, to do them together, and that's the purpose of the Torah. So where could you bridge that place between the Ratzu and the Shuv? And if you're doing a practice of meditation, and you're doing a practice of breath meditation, or you're just focusing on your breath, and that's like the Maggid writes, V'zo Hevel, this is the breath. If you're just focusing on your breath, okay, your exhale is your Ratzu, your inhale is your Shuv. Where is the Ratzu and Shuv? The Ratzu and Shuv is actually in that place between the Ratzu and the Shuv, because that gives rise to the Ratzu and gives rise to the Shuv. So if you're practicing this as a practice, you would say, okay, before I take an exhale in that retention period, I want to focus on what is my yearnings, what is my Ratzu, what are my desires, what is my yearnings. Am I desiring just another pair of shoes, or am I desiring another car, or am I desiring for transcendence? What is actually my desires? What is my Ratzu? And then you think about, do I yearn for transcendence? Do I have a sense that there's something more? And then in the Shuv, you do the opposite direction. So you, in the retention period, before the Shuv, you focus, okay, do I have a good awareness of what my purpose is? Do I have a good sense of like, what am I supposed to be doing in this world? And why do I have this body? Do I live in this time with these parents and this life? Is there some purpose that I can find in this world, in the life that I have? And when you do that, you actually achieve what the Torah's objective is, which is the Ratzu and the Shuv.